Welcome to With You Podcast.
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I still am David.
And I'm still Tara. And we're coming back at you with a movie review today, but a little different than we usually do them.
Yeah, we're not going to overview the movie.
Yeah, so no spoiler alerts this time. We actually were just watching the Oscars this week.
Yeah, it was fun. And you know what? The Van Dyke family, we do Oscars in a competitive way.
Yes, I know.
I don't know many people that are competitive Oscar watchers.
I know. We have a competition when it comes to March Madness, watching the Super Bowl, even the Oscars. We had, you can print out the score sheets.
Yep. It's kind of like a bracket. For those of you not used to the Oscars, it's the March Madness bracket, but for movies, sound, and video.
It used to be when they had the Oscars, you kind of saw all the movies in the movie theater.
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel like it's a different playing field because they're often, people aren't going to the theater as often.
Yeah.
They're often streamed on something that you don't have access to.
Yeah.
So I look at the list and I feel like I'm just guessing wildly in the dark, and it gets me really frustrated, but then it's still fun to find out how many you got right.
Yeah. And things like music and makeup and costumes and short animated and long animated and inanimated. I don't know. There's a lot of animated.
Inanimate objects. Yeah, it is kind of fun to look up the animated short films and the documentaries and things.
Usually you can do that on YouTube or a video provider. So it was fun. And who knew there was 23 awards given out? I just know that because...
Why do you know that?
Because my percentage...
Yeah.
So my son kept track of all of this. So it was nice. We were online back and forth texting and taunting.
Yeah, taunting texting.
But I know because the bottom, the denominator was 23.
Oh, I
and
see.
The numerator was, for me,
numerator
2.
2. You got 2 right.
I got 2 out of 23. I am not a movie file.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bad. Anyway, our son won. Our daughter-in-law came in second. You were a close third. And then I was a distant loser.
It's not all about winning. It did get us thinking about movies, though, and ones we wanted to see.
Yeah, and as we look through, and then we also called my brother, who is in the Screen Actors Guild, and said, what movie should we talk about? And he gave us a list, and we said, nope, maybe, okay, and this one sounds good.
Yes.
So the one we're going to do is called Conclave.
Yeah.
So it's about a mountain man that lives in a cave. His name was Con.
No,
it's not. That's not it.
That's not it.
All right.
Did you fall asleep during the movie again?
I did not. This time I stayed awake the whole time. It was fascinating. It was I don't know like what people's preference of movies are, so I don't think we're doing a recommendation, but it was very thought-provoking for us.
I think we should always give that disclaimer that when we review a movie, we're not recommending that it's something we endorse or think you should run out and see. It's just, we like to interact with things that are going on in the culture and in art, and movies they always involve relationships, for one thing.
Yeah, and life transitions in this one.
So there's always a lot of interesting things to talk about, and just kind of their fleshing out something that's going on in our culture usually. Yeah. And this one seems very timely.
It does seem relevant.
So just to explain it, Conclave is a movie about the process of choosing a new pope.
Oh.
So the pope in this movie has died. We're not going to give a lot of spoilers, but this is, that this is what's going on if you're watching a conclave.
Yeah. And the Pope is the leader of the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. And right now in our world, as of our recording of this podcast, the current Pope is not doing well health-wise.
Yeah. Pope Francis is 88. And has had a lot of respiratory issues.
Right.
And so it seems like
it's just a timely conversation about what that process is if his term doesn't last much longer.
Yeah. How about some fun facts?
I don't know if they're fun facts, but I did. So we're not part of the Catholic Church.
No.
I think I've seen on TV the process of choosing a pope once or twice. I can't remember how many times in our lifetime it's happened, but I've been aware of what that process is by the smoke that comes up. So we'll just explain the process. The conclave is when, when a pope has died or has stepped down.
Yep.
They gather all the cardinals in the Catholic Church,
so
right?
they gather a bunch of birds together.
Yeah.
What is a cardinal? So I'm going to ask, I'll be the question asker.
How do you define so they go from priest to bishop to cardinal,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So it goes from, thousands of priests, I don't know how many thousands, to a lower number of bishops, to I think 200-ish cardinals.
In this movie, it was 108.
Was
cardinal.
it? I thought it was more.
Remember, because they made that many copies.
Oh.
And gave everybody a copy. So,
okay. So all of those cardinals are supposed to gather to help elect a new pope. And that's the process of choosing the pope. And they have to keep voting until they've got a 2/3 majority.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So some fun facts about that. I did look up some, just to know what I was talking about so I wondered how long it can take, because they have to keep voting and keep voting until.
Yeah. And I think the idea, so a conclave is where they're sequestered. So they're brought into a space that's separate from any outside influence. So they're kind of locked down. So the beginning of the movie has all the cardinals gathering. They're
in the Vatican City.
Vatican City. Specifically, they meet for the meetings and the votes in the chapel.
In the Sistine Chapel.
Sistine Chapel. And they secure it with locks.
Which they recreated for this movie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's we were fortunate to tour. I believe you took some pictures.
You're not supposed to take pictures in the Sistine Chapel.
Oh, no, never mind then.
Or talk very loud. They're always, it's...
The nun shushed me a couple of times. I'm glad I didn't go to Catholic school.
So you talked and I took pictures.
Yeah. But so the conclave, they come together. They're locked in. They don't want influence from outside forces, so that they're really responsive to the Holy Spirit and who should be the next leader of the Catholic Church. And so they're all getting together, getting locked in. And how long...
Yeah, I wondered,
sequestered?
Because what if you're in total disagreement? You have to I think they vote 3 times a day until they get that 2/3 majority.
Yeah.
And so I did look up, I think the longest it ever took, it said it was 3 years, but that was in the 1400s. And I think they had maybe a different process. Yeah. But typically it doesn't take more than in the last century.
Again, we're not experts.
We're not don't.
This is kind of our Googling.
But apparently in the last century, it's never taken more than 5 days to come to agreement. So they know they're locked down for, somewhere between a couple days and less than a week to come to agreement.
Yeah. Well, it did remind me a little bit of reality TV. Of they make a vote and it doesn't meet the 2/3. They take a break. Everybody's kind of angling, and then they take another vote and it's a completely different number. You're not anchored to your previous vote.
Right. And I
it
wondered,
moves up and down and.
Yeah, how much campaigning can actually go on. And maybe we'll get into that when we talk about the process of the movie. But apparently you're not really supposed to be campaigning.
Right.
It's supposed to
it's supposed to be the Holy Spirit guiding these men to find the next head of the church.
Right.
So a little bit about the papacy in that this is the head of the Roman Catholic Church. It doesn't have to be a cardinal, or because typically I always thought the cardinal became the pope, and there's only certain criteria to be the pope.
You have to be male and you have to be Catholic. I think that's the written. That's the bottom line. What qualifies you to be pope, and then to be elected, right?
Yeah.
Elected by your
elected
peers,
by the cardinal college of
But
cardinals.
the unwritten rules, I think, are that I think it's very rare that it's not somebody who's in the status of cardinal who's who's elected. I think you're supposed to be 35 years of age or older, and most of them have got some, doctorate in theology or some.
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
That they'd be trained in theology.
Yeah. They've had some leadership positions usually, but those aren't actual requirements. So it's open to who people think will fit the, be the right fit.
And I know I can't remember who, but for us, it was Pope Benedict was previous to Francis, and he was from Germany. Pope Francis is from Argentina, and then before that was Pope John Paul II, and he was from Poland. But he was the young one, I remember. He kind of got elected young and served a long time.
How young was he? Because typically it says popes become pope in their 60s, and often end their term in their I don't know if that's the right word, but they 80s is usually when they're done. Either they die or they resign, and there very few resign because it's supposed to be it's God wants you in that position.
It's a life term.
Right. So I think, what did I read? 3% have resigned, 97% die.
Yeah, and that was just recently was Pope Benedict was resigned or stepped down. And before that, I think it was 600 years before the previous one stepped down.
Wow.
So you die in office. And
so that's some fun facts.
The average length, I think, of service, 7 years.
I thought it was longer. I really was surprised by that.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was more like 20 years, but I think the longest is 34.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I think the shortest was 12 days. But
did he get killed?
That was in the 1500s, and he died of malaria.
Oh, malaria. Okay. So I like reading all those murder mysteries. So I'm like, ooh, I wonder if something bad happened. Nope, malaria.
Malaria. Well, that was something bad that happened.
That was something bad that happened. So that's kind of the
little background
of our research on leadership in the Catholic Church. So we would love to be corrected. So
that's just a quick search online because I wanted to understand the context of how long people are usually holding that position and what it looks like when they're electing a new pope, because it's a really big deal. It's a really big deal. There's a lot of people usually waiting in the piazza, to find out the news of the new pope and which country they'll come from and represent. It's really a big deal.
And the character, I mean, it is a strongly acted movie. The characters in the movie, there's like John Lithgow is one of the cardinals, Stanley Tucci, and then Ralph Fiennes, and then the one that I thought had the smallest role but was amazing actress was Isabella Rossellini.
Yeah. And she grew up in Catholic school and was taught by nuns. So she had some some real life research into her role.
Very profound. So there was just a bunch of cardinals, a bunch of people you recognize, really well acted.
Yeah. And the whole thing takes place within the Vatican City in the rooms where they meet for the conclave. There's nothing outside, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful
the cinematography was remarkable.
Sets and design. And a lot of it was in the real space.
Yeah. So I think, Tara and I, you and I were talking, and we want to talk about themes that jumped out at us, not the overview.
So we're not going to go through like scene by scene what happens in this movie, partly because a lot of what happens in this movie is, the revelation of some secrets that these cardinals hold.
Weird, right? That people have secrets.
Weird.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And what qualifies them or disqualifies them from being able to serve. So we're not going to give away any of that.
Those secrets out. All of that was really, we don't want to ruin the film for anybody that wants to watch it. So.
No, but as we watched it, there were lots of times we were both kind of writing down things that were being said. We collected some quotes because we thought they were great jumping off points for talking about just ideas about faith and about leadership and about politics and
all that might be pertinent to us today, both with the Pope not doing well and just societally.
Yeah. I think kind of universal stuff.
Yeah. All right. So do you want to, what quote jumps out at you? Where do you want to start?
Well, okay.
Okay. You see what happened was.
Yeah. So what had happened? So let me just set this up so you know who this quote is from, because Ralph Fiennes' character is he's the dean of the College of Cardinals. And so as such, he has to kind of run the conclave. He has to sort of organize it and be the head of what's going on. And so he has to give an opening homily because they ask for God's, to be present in the selection.
And it's a fairly regimented
it's very
process.
Regimented.
And even the proclamation that he's supposed to make in the homily is pretty traditionally regimented.
Okay.
And then he has this quote, but because he goes off script.
Oh, right. Because you're saying it was like a liturgy sort of thing. It was
like a liturgy response. Right. And then he put it down and did that.
He put the script down and said his own piece.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of thoughts. He was close to the Pope. He had an investment in who was going to be next. Mm-hmm. He was also one of the candidates that was, not he didn't put him self-promoting, but said he didn't want the role.
Yep.
But anyway, he gave this little off-the-cuff sort of statement at the beginning of the conclave, and it's kind of the most often quoted piece of the movie, and also was something we were both writing down and thinking we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we couldn't quite get it all down, so I'm glad it was
should
helpful.
I just read the whole thing, or do you want to read it?
What you prefer. I'll read it.
Okay.
Over the course of... Oh,
go ahead.
You want to set it up any...
No. Go
ahead. There was a whole Latin piece, so let's just...
Yeah, do we need to do the whole thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Over the course of many years in the service of our Mother Church, let me tell you, there is one sin that I've come to fear above all others: certainty. Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance. Even Christ was not certain at the end. My God, why have you forsaken me?" he cried out in his agony in the 9th hour on the cross. Our faith is a living thing, precisely.
No, precisely.
Oh, precisely. I do need to get an eye check. Our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery. There would be no need for faith. Let us pray that God will grant us a pope who doubts.
Yeah.
Woo.
So that
he did it
land
better
well
than I did. Yeah.
With some people.
No, why not?
Well, so the piece that really stands out is him saying that certainty. He's saying it's a sin.
Yeah.
And he's saying that it's the enemy. If we're too certain about something, we're not all going to agree because we're standing too firm in one place and not listening to other people's points of view. And saying it's the enemy of tolerance, and really saying that Christ was not certain, which I don't know if we want to tackle that part. Well, he was asking for, the possibility of something different, I guess. And saying that he hopes the new pope will have doubt. So I think it's an interesting thing to talk about how doubt plays a part in our faith, and where he says our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. And I think it is something that people talk about a lot in faith. Am I allowed to have doubts about my faith? Do I have to be 100% certain about all of these parts of it?
And I think I do think though, like saying faith, like our faith is needed. Well, faith is something that is not certain. I mean, we have faith.
The very word, right?
The very word of like, I don't know. I guess it's knowing,
right?
Right. In this idea of certainty is knowing, like, I know this is, we talk about this in parenting books of like, here is God's way to marriage or God's way to parenting. There's a statement of knowing this is the way.
Right.
And there's not this humility of realizing, oh, we don't know God's mind.
Right.
And so I, for me, it wasn't so much certainty as truth as not knowing and having a position of not knowing that. Then I need my faith to like, I trust. I have this trusting space that even if I don't know, I can lean into that.
That was a lot of words. I'm trying to follow like the core of what you're saying.
Yeah, so not knowing,
But you're saying not knowing is different than uncertainty.
No, I think that's the piece of uncertainty is not knowing. So because uncertainty sounds like wishy-washy, and I think it's more like I can't know. It's the idea of knowing there's a capital T truth that's out there that I can know versus a capital T truth that's out there that I realize I can only approximate. And I have to be very careful in my approximation to say, this is the capital T truth.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a lot of words, but that's where it's hard,
Yeah.
right? Because there's this connection to, Brother Lawrence is saying, I believe, and I can't know fully, and that's where my faith needs to come in. And the danger is saying, and I think we see that in society, we see that of a lot of people saying, this is the way of doing something. And there's a danger in that.
I think that is the dangerous thing, is anytime people get firmly planted into, I know completely what is truth.
Yeah.
And then somebody's on the other end of that. Do you feel like there's a difference between uncertainty and doubt? Like uncertainty and not knowing is saying, I believe there's an absolute truth that I can't fully understand. And I'm going to let my faith kind of fill in the gap in between. Like I'm going to believe even if I don't know everything.
Right.
And I'm going to allow for there being things I don't know, which we just talked about a couple podcasts ago, the mystery of not knowing. And then doubt sounds more to me like more negative, more like I maybe don't believe this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I believe this or not.
Yeah.
So it sounds slightly different.
Well,
but
there was that quote, I forget who said it, but was even the Pope doubted.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to add that too, because they were saying something about the Pope, after he died, and people were talking about him, and they said,
in the movie, the Pope
in the movie, somebody said, do you know he had doubts too? And I think it was Ralph's character that said the Pope had doubts. And he said, oh, just in the church, not in God.
Yeah.
He never doubted God. He was doubting the church, which I think is another different. It's a big distinction.
Yeah, I think we cannot understand fully God, and so there's this lack of knowing. Doubt feels like I'm unsure about the essence of God rather than about why things are happening. And I think that's the piece. So faith is, this is who I understand God to be. How that gets expressed, things happening to me, I don't understand how that connects. That's where the uncertainty lies. And I think sometimes with our anxiety, when we get uncomfortable, we lean into certainty a lot of times to ease our own discomfort.
Right.
I have a friend who a thing was said about him, how he's drowning in nuance. And that creates a lot of anxiety because nuance means there's all these different possibilities. And it's hard to then kind of drill into, can I be okay with not knowing? Can I be okay with some uncertainty? And a lot of times it's no.
Yeah.
I need the hard fact.
Yeah. The not knowing is hard. So do you think there's room for that in faith? Where do you think doubt plays a part in faith? As he said, if there was only certainty and no doubt, there'd be no mystery.
Yeah. I think I see it in the Psalms. I mean, that's the best place for me of that is David, the psalmist, was known as a man after God's own heart, and yet had lots of doubts, lots of failures. And it was the turning back towards, and it was the embracing the faith, even in the doubts or the crying out. And I think that's the human condition of like, I don't understand, but if you really are the God of the universe, how would I understand? And so there's an appropriate positioning that I think doubt and uncertainty fits, because otherwise I start to be God if I know.
Right. Like, how could we ever say we know everything in this world?
It's pretty bold.
And put our flag in that and have fights. I mean, that's what a lot of the fights come from.
Yeah.
In politics, in faith, in a lot of things. It's people taking firm positions on either side and not allowing for there to be any gray area or to come towards, So I think you're right in that, like, when you have the doubts, how are you crying out to God about them, or are you turning your back?
Yeah.
Completely.
Because if I have doubts, then it must not be true, versus I have doubts and I
have doubts and help me understand.
Yeah. I have faith that you are true. And so help me. And I know my prayers around help me understand aren't always answered. There's this kind of perpetual not knowing.
Yeah.
And it's what you and I teach, right? Because there's no way of knowing what the outcome of a birth will be. There's no way of knowing what the outcome of a therapy process will be.
Mm-hmm.
We have approximations, we have guesses, we have evidence that this is the path, but each situation is unique.
Yeah.
And how do you live in the not knowing? How do you help people in that?
Are you asking me for real?
Yeah. Like in the birth process of like, I want a vaginal birth or I want a home birth, and you want that for them, but you don't promise it ever. So how do you talk through that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's true with anything in life, right? Birth is just an example of a situation in the human experience that you can't promise that we have any control over. You can plan and prepare for things, but I always tell people, manage the manageable and release the rest, which is really hard, the release. Yeah. And then, the things that you can control is how you respond in the moment and how you connect to each other.
Yeah.
And those are the parts that later you feel like, I think they're protective from trauma. And I think they have long-term benefits, of that connection and feeling stronger in being able to respond well in a hard situation. And that's it's just a proving ground for all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I tell people this is the starting line for parenting, where you're going to learn just how little control we have over anything. So how we respond to this is kind of going to move us forward into how we respond to all sorts of things as we raise children that we can't control and that we can't know the outcome, but we can control our response and how we grow, move forward, ask forgiveness, connect well.
Yeah.
That's a long answer, but
well, it's the process. It's trusting the process and letting go of the certainty of outcome. And I think that's the heart of it. Like what you just said, same thing of like parents can do things almost perfectly and still have problems with their kids, or parents can be a hot mess and their kids turn out okay. There's not necessarily, there's a process that's helpful, but there's no guarantees. And I think that was a lot of the arguments from some of the cardinals were like, this is what it needs to be. This is what needs to happen. And that drive led to discomfort of like, well, you're not trusting where's God in this? And you're not trusting. So back to the mystery of like, yes, we can do the process and be surprised by maybe the trials that are there, but also surprised by the beauty that comes out of that. Maybe not the outcome we want, but the beauty, which is mystery.
Yeah.
For me, beauty and mystery are tied together.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing.
And sometimes mystery can be hard, but and the way I would map that onto the way I live my faith, what I just described with preparing for birth is, managing the manageables, which means to me kind of how I live out my faith in this on earth, like attending church and being in community with other Christians and listening to my scripture every morning, on my audiobook and trying to learn more about God. That's kind of the parts I can control, and releasing the parts I can't understand.
Yeah.
And, the faith being the bridge in between those. But as you were saying that, I was thinking about Cardinal Lawrence, Ralph Fiennes' character in the movie, was pursuing some information he had found out about another candidate for the Pope role, and
one of the
trying
secrets.
to control, trying to discover something that might be good information before this man was elected. And he was pursuing that and trying to reveal stuff. And at some point he said, you know what, he gave it up and said, you know what, what did he say? God's will be done. And I'm just going to have to let that go and let God sort of control the outcome.
Yeah.
I think that was one of those moments where you have to I think he was realizing he was starting to grasp it too hard.
Yeah. And take a godlike position. I also thought about his approach. So thinking about uncertainty, and there was a lot of not knowing. That's where the secrets also throw things in interesting directions. he tried to respond with direct communication. He would go directly to people when he had information. He would go directly to, and you and I were having a little conversation while watching, like, well, that's dumb. You're just giving him information and power to use. And I think that's the danger. The danger is information will be used for a political power or used for control. And so trying to do the process the right way, there's still pulls in society, within the church, that make it difficult. And so are we willing to suffer the cost to do the direct communication, the open communication? I think families struggle with this, like generational communication patterns. It's been the cost of doing direct emotional present communication has gotten too much, and they find other ways, which lead to other problems. And it's like, how do we do things well? When we know there may or may not be
a good
cost,
response,
or a good response.
Yeah.
That really, because I think we talk about boundaries of like, oh, be careful, protect yourself. It's like, well, that's not necessarily always the best thing. It might be the best thing to prevent the worst outcomes, but it might not be the best process if we're really living in uncertainty.
Yeah. So the process is important, but sometimes, it was painful to watch this attempt at direct communication, and it kind of leading to, and as you mentioned, it was often because there was a desire for power. And that's I think that was the most painful part of this movie for me, is just realizing how much damage has been done in all faiths, but Christianity has a terrible history of getting intertwined with power. And which is really the antithesis of what Jesus taught. And you see it here where there's some draw for a lot of people to the power of the position and to getting their person in who will carry the faith or the Catholic Church in one direction or another. And so just intertwining it with politics and power is painful, because it feels like then we're missing everything. We're missing the point, and it's getting dangerous, and egos get involved in power, and it just turns ugly.
Yeah, well, and so for this, I too had a big reaction around power, and I think they are both Protestant and Catholic Christianity. We have Jesus as the example of leadership and power, and it was not what everybody thought. So his disciples, I mean, we see this in John, we see it in the Gospels of like, oh, he's going to be the king. And they were thinking, or like president or pope or, whatever position of power you see, they expected Jesus to be that. And in fact, the crowds did too. There's in the book of John, they're like, let's force him to be king. So the crowd's having a conversation of let's force Jesus to be our ruler. And he just kind of disappears, and he just kind of fades away in that story, because his leadership and his power was about serving and kind of a suffering, like I'm going to enter in and care for you in a different way than the power of from top down. It's a power from with. I mean, and that's why we focus on being with and process, is this leadership and power that we see Jesus having. That's upside down. There's writers that talk about upside down kingdom, that the more we try to control, the more we try to, in the name of Jesus, using power, we're actually doing the opposite. It's kind of why Judas kind of lost his mind. He was the purse keeper. He was the financial guy. And it was like, oh, wait, we're not having like a governmental overthrow. Then I'm out, because this is what I thought this meant. And there was a certainty that this is what this means. We put our
own template on it, and it's hard to see any other perspective. But that was a quote that brought up this thought too, was this conversation about who they wanted to be Pope. And Bellini, who's Stanley Tucci's character.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He did a great job. But he said no sane man would want the papacy. The men who are dangerous are the ones who do want it.
Yeah.
And that was just like,
Yeah.
because that draw of power isn't always the people who, the ones who are kind of lusting after it and driving for power aren't always the ones we want there, because their motivations aren't always pure.
Groucho Marx and I think Mark Twain both said the same thing. I would never want to be part or be a leader of an organization that would have me as a member or leader. And it's kind of to this point of understanding what that means. I don't want to be part of that. And I think that's a nice way that Tucci said it in character was, if you're striving for that, then your focus is off, because that's not what this leadership is about.
Right. And in the end, they were looking for the people that were trying to fade away.
Yeah.
That didn't want the position, because it said a lot more about their humility and their actual intentions.
Yeah. And it's hard, because reluctant leaders often give way to driven leaders. And organizations, and whether it's churches, countries, like powerful, purposeful, well-articulated, like, I know, I can promise you we're going to go this direction and this is what's going to happen. We should all be scared of that. I mean, it's comforting, but it's because, like you said, control. And so when we think of things of faith, it's the uncertainty that is powerful and actually allows God to work, rather than us going, thanks, I know my story. You know this. Like, God tells me just the next step. He rarely tells me the whole thing, because I think you and I are similar. If we had the whole picture, we'd be like, thanks, buddy, we got it. And we would do it on our own.
If we knew the whole story, we'd opt out. But I mean, that is a thing to know about God. And when we try to sort of get a feel for, if we're in alignment, or if somebody who's leading us is in alignment with true faith in Jesus Christ, is that God always gives us agency.
Yeah.
And Jesus never forced, his way.
Yeah.
There's always an openness to us having choice, which is the beautiful thing. It's not like a mandate, or we're not just created as robots who have no choice.
Right.
And it's the beautiful thing, but it's also the hard thing, because other choices end up more enticing to a lot of people, and things can get twisted. But it's a good sort of tell about any sort of faith practice. If it's forced on you, there's something twisted about it.
Yeah. It makes, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it makes me think about
we can move ahead.
Benitez. So Benitez is this kind of non-traditional cardinal, and there's this event that happens, and he speaks up, and what he says is a kind of a challenge of what is our faith, what is the church. Why don't you read that one? I read the long one.
Yeah. So there's a disagreement. I think there's starting to be some. Well, there's always divisions in the different ways that the cardinals want the church to go,
right.
But it's now being spoken because there's been sort of an event that's brought out a lot of heated talk. So they're sort of fighting amongst themselves, and this guy stands up very quietly and he says, "My brother cardinal, the church is not tradition. The church is not the past. The church is what we do next." And that made me think, and I had a lot of thoughts about it. What's your first thought about that definition of the church? The church is what we do next.
Yeah, I think it highlights the response. Are we responding to the call of the gospel? Are we responding to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and his example? It's a call to our response. It's not a call to, well, we've always done it this way, or here's the rules, and you know how I feel about rules. I'm a family therapist. Yeah. I'm a family therapist because you get to break up the rules. But it's a call to, for me, it's a call to, how are you going to respond?
Responding to what's happening now. Yeah. And I agree, I totally agree with that. But I also think the church it folds in our tradition. It folds in our past. We can't deny all of where we've come from.
No.
But it's also like what the church is followers of Jesus Christ. And so our response is important, but we're not defined by our actions either.
Yeah.
You know, we are, and that's another quote that I forget who said it, but he said, "We're mortal men. We serve an ideal. We can never be ideal." So it's kind of what really gets highlighted in this movie is the fallibility of us as humans, even as, you know, elected leaders in a faith tradition, trying their best. Their whole job is to follow God.
Yeah.
And we still are messed up.
They have doctorates in theology. I mean, they think about this and
and they really, a lot of them very, very sincerely intend to follow God with their whole body, their heart, their soul, their life. And yet every one of them had something, you know, that was not, it was, as they said, a black mark in their past or a failing or a mistake. And so do all of us as humans, which is why, I don't know, you know, why as Christians, we get painted by the actions often of other Christians or the church.
Yeah.
And we have to always remember that we as people are always going to mess up in our attempts and that we can never be perfect, but we follow a God who is ideal and is perfect. And so our goal isn't to become perfect. We can never on this earth become perfect.
No.
But we keep trying that, and we keep expecting it of other people.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
That is one of the problems.
It's one of the problems.
Well, but you live this out. I see you living this out in an interesting way. So, like,
how's that?
It's something you've said over and over on the podcast. So we're talking about something, and you go, "We're not experts," and then I'm like, "Oh, there," you know. But I think it's speaking to. It's not that we don't know content and we haven't had experiences, but it's a caution to say, here is the right way to do that. So whenever I hear you, like, as we're talking now, I'm like, oh yeah. So when you say, oh, we're not experts, we're just sharing our opinion, it's really leaning into this caution of we're doing the best we can. And, on faith, we feel we're in the right space, and we want to be cautious of that. Yeah. We don't want to mislead anyone else. There's uncertainty because we're limited. Our vision is limited. We're limited by the families we grew up in and the experiences we have. Yeah. So that's caution. I hear that now as we're having this conversation. I'm like, oh, because I'm like, no, we are like, we have lots of life experience, lots of skills, but it's you're being cautious about
exactly
not being
because
certain.
We'll never be perfect. And I don't want anyone, I think anytime there's a human leader that people follow blindly or write down everything they say or follow their word as truth, we're on the wrong path.
Yeah.
And I don't want to ever say that everything I say is right. Like, even if I've studied...
I'm going to grab that piece of for our marriage.
I've never claimed to always be right.
I know.
And I think we always as humans need to be cautious about people we follow, about trying to be a leader that people follow and think that we're infallible. So it is like always remembering that I might make a mistake. I think everyone should seek advice, also listen to their own intuition, and also know where the absolutes are. And for us, the absolute truth is found in Scripture, in the Bible. And there's a lot of debate about even that. Yeah. And so it's
and our prayer life,
right? So how do you know what to believe in this world?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard, but no human should be 100%
right.
the voice you listen to without taking in others.
Yeah. And I think that there's a continuum. So we're talking about this kind of certainty continuum. I think there's the other end of the continuum that is, we can know nothing. So the only thing that we know is our truth. And the idea that we are the arbitrators of our truth and nothing else for anyone else becomes a type of God and certainty on the far other end of the continuum.
Right.
And I react to that all the time. It's like,
follow your truth.
Yeah, follow your truth.
Because that's ever changing too.
Right.
You know, that's not an anchor.
8 billion truths.
I can't anchor myself into myself. like that's going to blow with the wind.
Right. And no generalizability if we think science. Right. It's just so this, you can see we're horrible to watch movies with. Because
we didn't talk this much during the movie.
No, but we both looked at each other. I mean, it is weird. We're at the movie and we're taking notes and we look at each other. It's like, oh, she's scribbling. I did have that moment of like, she's scribbling. What just happened? I probably should write that down too. So there's a competitive part.
That's what was happening.
So the last part, I think there's, and the subtext, there's lots of subtext in this movie about religion, politics, gender, all sorts of things. The one gender piece we want to talk about is Isabella Rossellini and her role. So she's silent for most of the movie.
Yeah. I mean, and that partly plays into just what the gendered roles are in this system, because the people who have positions in the Catholic Church are male, and the nuns who they serve the men in this conclave, so they have their own place, and they prepare the meals and they clean the quarters, and
they're separate,
and so Isabella, who is an amazing actress in her own right, is in the movie but has very few lines because she's just sort of present. And her one line that is memorable, she says, "Although we sisters are supposed to be invisible, God has nevertheless given us eyes and ears." So she's present.
So good.
She's seeing, she's hearing, she's responding, but she doesn't have a role or a voice to speak out against a lot of what's happening. But she definitely responds.
Yeah, for me, her response was very Bonhoeffer-esque. It's like she was in her role, respecting that, but it got to a point. There was enough chaos, enough suffering, enough problems that she had to speak out, even though it kind of violated some of the cultural religious norms. She's like, there was a point where she just like,
she had enough.
I know the cost of this and it's worth it. So there was that kind of got me emotional. And then the direction it went, because they listened to her.
They did listen. She had hard facts because she pays attention.
I believe the kids say she kept receipts. That's her eyes and ears and being present.
And the way she helped kind of information come out was also very understated. She just happened to open a computer and happened to have the person who needed to see it. She was intentional. She was intentional.
And mostly working in the system.
Yeah, within the system until she had to speak out.
Yeah. And I think that's something for us. I know there's lots of things going on politically here in the U.S. And having to decide when is the time to speak out and what to do about that when there's chaos. And realizing, again, I don't have all the information, and so there's not certainty, and yet there's going to be a threshold where there's a need to speak out.
Right. I know. I've been thinking, I've been having thoughts going through my head all the time lately because we're writing some stuff about conflict and communication and how you say you can't not communicate and how even silence is a message.
Yeah.
And thinking, when is the right time to speak out about certain things? When is it effective? But it was encouraging to see this character work within the system and not use a lot of loud words, but also communicated in different ways where she stood. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And to speak and to make your feelings known.
Yeah. I really, really liked the film.
Yeah.
In terms of what it made us think about.
And it made us think.
It stirred us up in terms of some of the underlying messages.
Yeah.
That's for a whole nother time. That's a time right now we're just going to have eyes and ears and not speak on that.
We're going to let people make their own judgments on any agenda or other messages. That's not where we wanted to go. We wanted to kind of really highlight what really stood out to us about bigger themes. And we hope it's made you think a lot.
Yeah.
It's also something, if you can't tell, we love to engage in. So if anybody wants a deeper discussion about this, we really invite your questions. I know we keep saying this, but
is there a place that they can leave a voice message so we can actually have their voice on
and play the message.
Play the message and respond to it.
I think on
our website,
Spotify, there's a way to do that. But they could definitely email us, and we can send a
voice clip via email to
an MP4 or something. Podcast at
gmail.com.
we will put
someone checks it. I guess obviously it's not me, but someone checks it.
Check the show notes, and we will try to link to the best way to communicate with us. But we really want to engage. We want to hear your questions. We'd love to help, get this message out to more people too. Just generally our podcast, the more it's shared, the more we get engagement, like reviews and things like that, the more other people see it. So we love any word from the outside world that you're listening.
Yes, we're in our own little podcast conclave.
In our bubble. The windows are shut. We're speaking to ourselves.
That's right. And occasionally we set fire that we were waiting to see if it turns black or white.
Yeah, should we explain that?
No, they'll figure it out.
So that part you have to watch
a teaser.
The movie
You got to watch
find
the
out.
movie.